Elections will come to order. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Click.
Present.
Representative Cortez.
Here.
Representative Busey.
Here.
Representative Burros.
Here.
Representative Kane. Representative Fierro.
Present.
Representative Israel.
Here.
Representative Middleton.
Here.
A quorum is present. Good morning, everybody. Hope you had a great weekend. We will not be voting out any bills today. Bill authors should be talking to you about firming up support for their legislation, and you will be notified before we vote on any bills. For scheduling purposes, it will be our first order of business after establishing a quorum, generally speaking. That way, if you need to lay out bills in other committees, you'll be able to plan accordingly. Are there any announcements? The chair notes that Representative Swanson has joined the meeting. I'm ready to get started today, and we have 6 bills on the agenda. As a reminder, anyone who wishes to testify on any of the bills we will be hearing today, you must register on the electronic witness affirmation kiosks in the hall before you testify. And you also need to indicate each bill you would like to testify on. If you need assistance, please ask the Assistant Committee Clerk, Teresa Shirley, and she can help you register. Additionally, if you have any documents that you would like distributed to the members, please give them to Teresa before you begin your testimony, and she will distribute them for you. If there's no questions, we can start on our first bill. Our first bill will be HB 431 by Representative Shaheen, and the chair lays out House Bill 431 and recognizes Representative Shaheen to explain the bill.
Thank you, Chair Click, Vice Chair Cortez, members. HB 431 seeks to make an individual ineligible to serve as an election poll watcher if that individual has been convicted of a felony. Our elections are sacred, and the integrity in our election process is vital. However, despite the fact that there are a large number of jobs in the private sector and public sector that are not available to those convicted of a felony, a person can be a poll watcher in Texas with a felony conviction. Job examples where that are not available to an individual convicted of a felony include, of course, peace officer and other law enforcement, emergency medical personnel. Of course, banks will not hire anybody with a felony, and obviously any of the jobs in our schools. And there are many more jobs that exclude people with felony convictions. Obviously, you can't serve on a jury. I certainly understand and believe in redemption. However, it's reasonable to withhold certain responsibilities from individuals who have made poor decisions in their past. Similar legislation passed out of this committee in the 82nd session by a vote of 6-2. Madam Chair, we are working on a committee substitute which will add that a poll watcher must sign a standard election witness affidavit that they are not a felon. With that, members, I'm happy to ask or take any questions rather than reserve the right to close.
Any questions, members? Okay, no questions. The first witness is Chris Davis.
Morning, Madam Chair, committee members. Chris Davis with the Texas Association of Election Administrators testifying on House Bill number 431. Our only question was just answered by the author in regards to who would be responsible for checking on the eligibility status of the poll watchers, giving that mostly generally candidates, campaigns, and parties are the appointees of poll watchers. It sounds like there'd be a standard witness affidavit included as part of the application form in substitute language, and it's something we'd like to see.
Members, any questions? Thank you for your testimony. Chair calls Keith Ingram.
Good morning, committee. Keith Ingram here from the Texas Secretary of State's office on House Bill 431. Available for any questions.
Any questions, members? Representative Swanson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm just amazed that this is not already in law. Is any comment on that?
I don't know why it hasn't ever been enacted.
Okay.
I mean, I think it goes to the problem of who's going to check, but I think if the poll watcher swears to it, then that'll be the initial check.
Okay, well, this seems like an obvious thing that we should have already had. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, members? Representative Busey?
And this may not be for you, but what would be the punishment for lying? What if a felon gets up there and fills out this
Well,
form and lies
there's
about it?
the penal code violation for tampering with a government document if you lie on a record, including an election record. So that's already in statute. I don't know if there would be any separate crime other than that.
Do you know what the consequences are for that? The range?
For tampering with government document, I am not sure. I think it's a second-degree felony, but I have to go look.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions, members? Thank you, Mr. Ingram.
Thank you.
The chair calls Paul Hodson.
Morning, Madam Chair, members. Paul Hodson, Burleson, Texas. I am a precinct chair and election judge through 5 cycles, so I'm testifying for the bill. Becoming an election judge was quite an eye-opener in that you see, wow, the people really do oversee the election on their own, and the integrity of the election process is of utmost importance. So keeping the workers who are there, those who are ones who have shown themselves to be basically good, upstanding citizens. And I understand as Representative Shaheen said, rehabilitation is one thing, but that's something that I think you forfeit from an election integrity perspective, and just how important that is in our voting and democratic process. So appreciate your time. Thank you for working through this issue.
Mr. Hodson, you're representing yourself?
Just myself.
Okay. Members, any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair calls Lon Burnham.
Good morning, Chair, members. Talk about nick of time. I just got registered for this and got walked back in the room. I'm Lon Burnham, and I'm representing Public Citizen, and we're testifying against the bill. Testifying against the bill because I came of age when a whole lot of my suburban high school friends made really bad choices. Now they're eligible to be retired. They should not be disqualified because they made bad choices in their youth from participating in the process this way. We are desperately short of people that are willing to perform this task, and anybody that can walk and talk should be allowed the opportunity to participate in the process this way. We're talking about this from the public citizen standpoint. I've given you my personal view. I think this is bad legislation and undermines what we're trying to accomplish, which is to have more opportunities for people to participate in the process this way. Thank you for your time.
Members, any questions? Okay. Alrighty. The chair recognizes Representative Shaheen to close.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. We certainly want people to participate in the process. That's vitally important. The integrity of the process is more important. Mr. BC, just to respond to your question, an individual will commit election fraud if they falsify that affidavit, so it's a Class A misdemeanor. So that's up to $4,000 fine and up to a year in prison. With that, ma'am, I close. Thank you, members. Any other questions? Thank you all. Have a good morning.
If there are no objections, House Bill 431 will be left pending. The chair hears no objections. House Bill 31 is left pending without objection. The chair calls Representative Bonin to lay out House Bill 1888.
Thank you, Chairman and members, thank you for hearing House Bill 1888. The flexibility of polling locations was designed to accommodate more voters near their homes or workplaces, but some subdivisions of the state have abused this flexibility and targeted desirable voting populations at the exclusion of others. This practice is commonly referred to as rolling polling and has resulted in the selective harvesting of targeted votes. House Bill 1888 confronts this problem by requiring that each polling place during an election be located at a set location for the duration of the early voting period. This will ensure that no polling location may target certain populations on specific days or at specific times. Additionally, House Bill 1888 would deter confusion by establishing that polling stations remain at a single accessible place throughout early voting. The predictability in polling places following the implementation of this bill would provide reliability and accessibility for all voters. And to be clear, this legislation does not prescribe the number of locations, so there could be as many or as few locations as the election administrator determined, and it does not weigh in on those locations. It simply says they must be consistent throughout the course of the election. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have, and I'd like to reserve the right to close.
Members, any questions for Representative Bonin? I actually have one. Can you kind of give some examples of how you've seen this used?
So the most common example typically has been seen in school bond elections, where voting machines will be taken to school facilities for a window of a few hours. Typically, this would occur during school activities where it's anticipated there would be a significant number of parents and teachers present who would be supportive of the bond measure.
So would this involve potentially doing this outside the hours of normal voting?
That actually may be the case. In many of these elections, the elections being administered by the local entity or by the district, for example, as opposed to the county. And yes, this has occurred outside of standard voting hours.
Thank you. The chair calls Glenn Maxey.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I'm Glenn Maxey with the Texas Democratic Party, and we have registered in opposition to this bill. While we very much understand the abuses that Representative Bonin is talking about of a authority choosing the voters during a low turnout election, especially bond elections, where the abuse has been most often discussed, we're concerned about sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Having ability of communities in a general election to do mobile voting is a tremendous convenience to some populations. For instance, in a county where the clerk is going to a particular rural city or town for just a day, the amount of voters may not be sufficient to keep it open for the entire early vote location or period, but being able to do a single day in a rural community, or more importantly, to do the voting in a senior citizen community or a nursing home for half a day. Many communities schedule those kinds of activities with mobile voting. So our desire would be that this would have an exemption for the general election in November, which is a high turnout election, where you can still do this kind of voting for special populations who can't get to an early vote location.
Members, any questions? Thank you for your testimony. The chair calls Chris Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, Chris Davis with the Texas Association of Election Administrators, testifying on House Bill 1888. Madam Chair, a lot of our members have and still employ legitimate uses of temporary branch polling places, be they small counties, medium-sized counties, large counties. We inevitably have territory and areas on the fringes of the county that don't fiscally warrant a full-time early voting site. Could be across 2 weeks. So we try, county election officers, to be fiscally conservative in that, but we recognize that rolling polling can be a problem. And we recognize that consistency, I think, is a key word in the author's, intent of the bill. And what our members are interested in is perhaps establishing and using temporary branch polling places consistently across elections in a year, where their voters know that this is the place they can go to in that fringe area for perhaps the one day in the early voting period, and that there's a consistency where it's not something that is just kind of playing the game of whack-a-mole, where entities that may be conducting an election can sprout up an early voting polling place, and proponents of whatever they're trying to pass are the only ones that are really aware. So that's why we're testifying on this. We're interested in continuing a dialogue and perhaps having some of our concerns and questions answered with the author in his office regarding some kind of happy medium of really protecting and establishing consistency across elections for early voting polling places.
Members, any questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, ma'am.
The chair calls Christina Atkins.
Good morning. Christina Atkins with the Texas Secretary of State, testifying on 1888. And I'm sorry, I lost my voice for the second week in a row. So,
anyone have questions, members? Representative Israel.
Good morning, Ms. Atkins.
Good morning.
Do you see this as a blanket end to mobile voting as we know it, this bill?
I think that that's the intention behind it, and I think that it would limit substantially having temporary branch locations, not just the rolling polling, but I think it has, as Mr. Maxey indicated and Mr. Davis indicated, the effect of probably limiting branch voting locations beyond that as well.
Okay. Thank you. I have some other questions, but I think you've answered my big one right now. Thank you.
Sure.
The chair calls on Representative Bonin to close.
Could I ask a question or say something first?
I have a question.
Okay. Representative Swanson.
I just wanted to thank you for bringing this bill, Representative Bonin. I personally saw this to be a real extreme. Some years back, my school district hired me, since I had been an election judge for years, and my job was to actually go around to different open houses on every night of the week all over the district. Fortunately, my district does not do that anymore, but there's nothing from keeping them from doing it. But they didn't tell the parents and the teachers how to vote, but all night long they would make announcements over the intercom system saying, please go to the gym to vote, please go to the gym to vote. And it really bothered me. I never participated again after that year because I felt like I was participating in something that was not fair to the other voters. It was kind of a setup to ensure that the bond proposal would pass. And then I know that the town where I went to high school would actually take the voting to the football games and actually have their polls under the stands there at the football games. And I just find that very disturbing, and I want to make sure that we fix that so that can't happen. So thank you for bringing your bill.
Representative Israel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Mr. Bonin. There's a couple of target populations that I'm concerned with, and I guess one of them is, in my district, I have a lot of state employees. And I know that we schedule a mobile voting site to come to the Capitol complex because there's about 70,000, more or less, state employees in our region. So being able to say we're going to have a mobile voting site here is quite convenient. It's one more thing they can check off their list. And then the other one is senior citizens. I know out in Manor, in my district, and in a couple of larger, more organized senior facilities, it's very, very helpful and very convenient. So I'm wondering if you'd be open to some changes, because it seems like your big concern is about schools, and I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to do some language that would not harm dense employment centers and senior living centers in particular.
Sure. Well, I appreciate your comments, and there's always room to discuss how we can address the goals that we all have, and maybe there is a strategy that would address your concerns and allow us to prevent selective vote harvesting, which we've seen before. I would share with you that there is nothing in this legislation that would prevent polling location to be set up for state employees, just so long as it's throughout the entire course of the early voting period. So it would have to be available to them. And if it's in a densely populated area and there are thousands of them and they're going to take advantage of it, it would seem that wouldn't be a hardship for the entity administering the election to do that. So there's nothing that would preclude that need from being met. I would also point out that we heard concerns about rural environments, or, as you mentioned, senior citizens, and frankly, state employees probably don't qualify under either of those when it comes to the Capitol complex. So I certainly understand your concerns, and I'd be happy to see if there's some way that we can address them. But I do want to be clear, there's nothing in this bill that would preclude having a location. It just says that it would have to be kept open throughout the course of the election to provide an equal opportunity and consistency for everyone who wishes to go and cast a vote. And while certainly bond elections in districts have been really the most egregious example of this practice, it's not been isolated to those. So I think it would be a little naive to think that no such thing has ever happened in an urban county during a general election.
Representative Kane.
Hey, Representative Bonin, I'm trying to understand what this does here. So since they didn't come testify, I'll remind us that the Republican Party of Texas calls for getting rid of rolling polling for bond and tax rate elections. I don't see this abolishing anything, so I'm wondering what we're exactly regulating that, I guess, in practice, does this help us end the practice of rolling polling?
This legislation certainly would, yes.
Okay. Could you explain to me how exactly it would do that? Because I still see the words movable, and so I guess I don't see how this ties into the code. But.
Yeah, so what this would require is that for a given election, the early voting locations must be consistent and open throughout the course of the early voting period. So in other words, what it would preclude would be taking voting machines from one location to another for specified hours on various days. It would require consistency. So there could be as many locations as desired, and there would be no restriction on that, but they would have to be the same for that election. And they would have to be open during voting hours.
Thank you.
Representative Middleton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think you did work on this issue last session, and do these rules already apply to the May election, or are we rolling this into November?
No, this legislation specifically is not in current statute for general elections or May elections.
Okay, and would you say that by providing more uniform, I guess, polling locations and longer hours, we're providing more opportunity for voters to have a say?
So that is precisely the point, is that if the locations are consistent and they're open during all of the hours during which the election is held, then you provide equal opportunity for the largest number of voters to participate, as opposed to having select locations only at specified hours or days during the early voting period that are targeting a certain population of voter.
And I think that's exactly what we want, because a lot of times they're voting on things that would result in increasing everybody's property taxes.
Well, I think we want that for all elections, whether it's a bond election, a TRE, a general election. I think we want voter participation, and we want it to be fair and open to all who are allowed to participate in that election.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. I close.
If there's no objection, House Bill 1888 will be left pending. The chair hears no objection. HB 1888 is left pending without objection. The chair lays out HB 1459 and recognizes Representative Gonzalez to explain the bill.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members. Thank you for allowing me to lay out House Bill 1459 before you this morning. Current Texas law requires the presence of a presiding judge and alternate judge to oversee much of the elections process, from the polling places to counting stations. These judges, one from each major party, are also there to make final decisions in the event of when there's a dispute. The presiding judge is selected by the county commissioners court from a list of names submitted by the county chair of the political party whose candidate for governor received the highest number of votes in the county in the most recent gubernatorial election. The alternate judge is selected in the same manner, but from a list compiled by the political party that received the second most votes. However, no alternative judge is required for early voting ballot boards or for signature verification committees, which examine mail or provisional ballots and determine whether a ballot and signatures are valid. This means a presiding judge has final say on when a vote counts. Because presiding judges are selected by a party which received the most votes in the gubernatorial election, as a result, there are many counties across the state in which one political party has ultimate the decision-making process. This is an issue because there's lack of accountability and oversight when poll workers from one party are making the ultimate decision. This is a common sense fix that will promote bipartisanship in our elections. And basically what this bill proposes to do is that it requires an alternate presiding judge appointments to early voting ballot boards to be appointed in the same manner as all other election judges. So it just makes it consistent, right? And so the alternative judges will be appointed in the same manner that in every other in every other process. Also with the signature verification board. This bill will take effect prior to the 2020 general election. I want to thank you for allowing me to lay out this bill. If there are any questions, and I would also like to reserve my right to close.
Members, any questions?
Yes.
Representative Kane?
It would seem, if I'm counting correctly, that by adding that second judge, that makes the board have 4 votes.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would never come to what do you do in the event of a tie?
And yes, this issue was brought to my attention this week, and there is Mr. Glenn Maxey, who is going to be a resource witness that will address that issue.
Thank you.
Any other questions, members?
Thank you.
The chair calls Glenn Maxey.
Thank you. I'm Glenn Maxey with the Texas Democratic Party here in support of this legislation. These signature verification committees and ballot boards have historically been an uneven number of members, with the sort of the tiebreaker being the party that won the election in the last gubernatorial election. With this change, these ballot boards will be even numbered, Mr. Kane, and I think that is actually a good thing. I think what could be helpful in a substitute to this bill is to perhaps add some language that says a tie vote goes to the voter. It appears to me that if this board is going to make the decision that a ballot is going to be thrown out, somebody's right to cast their choice is being set aside, that it should be a bipartisan decision, that ballot was not issued in a legal manner, whether it was not signed or the signatures don't match. It should take somebody from both parties to say that is what's on those pieces of paper. These decisions are not done in a vacuum. People are looking at the back of a ballot envelope where the ballot is sealed. You don't know how that voter has voted by looking at the ballot, but you have a strong indication of how that voter voted because you're looking at the application, and those applications come to those voters through partisan methodologies of parties mailing them. It doesn't take a rocket science after about the fifth vote, a ballot envelope to look at or application to know that application was submitted by the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. And since we have annual ballots, the great majority of these say right on the application, I request even if it's the general election, you're looking at the application before the primary and it says I request a Democratic primary ballot or I request a Republican primary ballot. So you have a strong indication from the get-go of what's in that ballot envelope, and therefore if a partisan group is making the decision, a partisan vote can disqualify somebody. So I think having an even number, and if it ties, that the voter's ballot gets counted would be the way to go.
Members, any questions? Thank you. The chair calls Christina Atkins.
Hello, Christina Atkins with the Texas Secretary of State testifying on 1459.
Members, any questions?
Thank you.
The chair calls Alan Vera.
Good morning. Alan Vera, Chairman, Harris County Republican Party Ballot Security Committee, testifying on 1489. Basically, this bill codifies the position of alternate judge on the ballot board and vice chair on the signature verification committee. We have no problem with that change. This helps solve some day-to-day problems when the EVBB and SVC are carrying out their duties. But the House Committee on Elections should be aware that while the bill touches on another important issue, it doesn't solve it. As written in Section 2 of the bill addressing 87027 is the line, the same number of members must be appointed from each list submitted by the parties. So reading that, you might believe that the same number of members from each party are actually reviewing the signatures, checks and balances for election integrity. But that's not the case. Simply appointing the number of members from each list doesn't guarantee equal representation when the signature work's actually being done. We tried to create some correcting language with the bill's authors and the Secretary of State. We were unsuccessful because the appointment and workflow of those boards and committees is complicated, and the process is not equal across the state. The truth is, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find more than a dozen counties in the state that do this the same way. There's no uniformity. As our population ages and mail ballots become a larger percentage of all ballots cast, you're going to have to overhaul this process to ensure that you're confident it's actually helping to ensure integrity. This bill does not harm election integrity. It does help clarify the chain of command. We're not going to scream if it comes out of committee. We'd be glad if it does, but we want you to keep the big picture in mind. The problem isn't completely solved. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Members, any questions? Mr. Vera, you meant, I believe you said 1489. You meant
Alan Vera on 1459.
Okay, thank you.
Questions? Thank you.
Representative Swanson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Vera, could you address this issue about whether we end up with an even number of people on the board that Representative Kane brought up?
The The reality is, on signature verification, you have two people looking at each ballot envelope and each ballot application and carry envelope. Ideally, you have one from different parties. So you've got two people balancing each other off. They're making decisions on, is that the signature of the voter? And is it the same on both forms you're looking at? Thanks to a bill you introduced last time, we now can go back a few years to check more. It's important that you have people from both parties looking at every single set of signatures. Okay? When you don't have that, then you either have someone looking by themselves, which they shouldn't be doing, okay, or you have someone being paid to sit around and do nothing. So the issue of having the same number of people is not the problem. The issue on ballots is, on the signatures, it's pretty much a judgment call, okay? And if you have a tie, and if the alternate judge and presiding judge disagree, that's going to be a stalemate, and it may be solved different means. But usually it's not. On signatures, by the time you get a good look at the previous 6 years, you've got a good idea. Even as the voter ages and the handwriting gets messier, the initial cap letter is usually the same, doesn't change. On issues of provisional ballots, the data available from the voter registrar is usually enough to settle the issue. Is the voter registered? Does the voter have a right to vote in that particular district on that election? So those are usually handled by fact. Okay, but there could be ties, and they have to be broken somehow.
Representative Kane?
Mr. Vera, you had mentioned speaking with the bill's author about at least what in your mind would be a correction or a fix to this. I guess two sub-questions. One, were you able to maybe draft language that would bring stability and predictability to this bill?
I drafted language that basically said that as long, from any two parties who submitted the same number of names for approval, it is required that the same number of members from each party be actively engaged in reviewing the ballots. And that gets us into situations where you've got the Libertarian Party or the Green Party, or you've got West Texas with no Democrats or South Texas with no Republicans. Mm-hmm. So there's always an exception to that language. So I try to do a one-sentence fix, and it wouldn't work because of all the exceptions.
Is there no reason that you didn't, maybe persist on a fix and let us know today that you're instead just opposed to this bill? I'd like to have a clean answer.
The bill is not doing something wrong. The bill is actually helping, but it's not the whole help. I would hope the committee would insist that we fix the issue of having the same number of people from both parties actively involved in the work, actively reviewing signatures and making decisions on the provisionals.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Do you think, Mr. Vera, that it's important that we have a process in statute in the event that the election judge or the judge of the board is unable to serve?
I would recommend yes.
So there's some certainty in the process
Yes.
in the event.
Yes.
I know in our county, our chair was, her husband suffered an illness and actually passed away during the course of an election.
Mm-hmm.
And having a process in statute that's clear as to who then is responsible, I think would be a helpful thing. Would you agree?
I agree. This bill does something toward that by having an alternate judge. As just as in a precinct election, if the presiding judge can't show, the alternate takes over. That is kind of set up in this bill. But the more details, the better.
And as far as the even numbers, I've actually worked on signature verification and ballot board before. And, sometimes some of the members of that committee may have a doctor's appointment and cannot attend that particular day's work. But, it is important that it should be a team, a bipartisan
Yes.
team in reviewing those. But
in our county, we have always, the county clerk has asked for a certain number and alternates. So we provide the same number of the appointed, but we also, the county commissioners approve the alternates. Okay? And if someone's going to be sick and knows it, the alternate can take place.
so we do in our county
Okay.
as well, add more names than what we typically use.
Good.
And it's the practice in my county, and it may be in yours, based on the number of ballots received. They then know how many staff on the committee to ask to come in and review?
Yes, ma'am. 2016, we had 157,000 mail ballots. Everybody was all hands on deck, for sure.
Okay.
Any more?
Thank you for your
Thank you.
testimony. The chair calls David Carter.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Committee. I'm David Carter from Bell County. I'm an election judge, basically representing myself today. And I am speaking in opposition to the bill because it's, as it's been pointed out, it's a well-intentioned bill. But in my experience with the legislature, just adding more height to the stack of the code that exists here in Texas, if it doesn't really fix something and doesn't make things better, it's just adding height to the stack. It doesn't really solve problems. I'm a fighter pilot, also a computer programmer, a systems analyst, and I take a systems approach. In a perfect world, maybe in the next life, when we have a legislative process, we'll have, before the committee gets bills, there'll be a working group to perfect bills. There's no process like that now. And so it's a hard task you have as a committee to look at bills, well-intentioned, but decide a judgment call on your part as to whether it's really worth the effort to put it into code and then and it doesn't solve problems. So that's the reason why I opposed this particular bill. It just needs perfecting, and I think it should come back for another hearing at some other time.
Members, any questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, ma'am.
The chair calls Ed Johnson.
Ed Johnson, representing myself and on House Bill 1459. Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, I was, what Alan Vera said was a lot what I was going to add. One thing that was a little confusing with me, I thought the code had the judge's final authority on the signature verification, but I may be wrong. If it's not, you probably do need some way to break that tie in this decision process. But this is a good step forward because you do need some kind of alternate judge, as you well know, Chairman, on the signature verification board. It's a kind of a hodgepodge when the judge doesn't show up of who's in charge and what's going on.
Members, any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to testify for, on, or against HB 1459? The chair recognizes Representative Gonzalez to close.
Madam Chair, Committee, thank you again for allowing me to lay out my bill this morning. I encourage the committee to vote this bill out of committee. This will ensure that both Democrats and Republicans have an equal say. It will ensure that we apply policy, not politics, and ensure integrity in our elections process. This does solve a problem. It's a step in the right direction. We are more than happy to work with anybody who has any input to work on a committee sub. We do have the language that Mr. Vera suggested earlier. We were working to try to incorporate that into this bill to try to make it better. Again, if anybody has any comment to that or any suggestions on how we can improve that, please let me know. With that, if there are no questions, I close.
Representative Kane, did you have a question?
Yes. Ms. Gonzalez, was your purpose in this bill to lower the number of rejected ballots?
Lower?
Yeah, to decrease the number of rejected ballots?
Yes.
Thank you.
No other questions? Okay, thank you for laying out your bill. If there's no objection, House Bill 1459 will be left pending. The chair hears no objection. House Bill 1459 is left pending without objection. The chair lays out House Bill 1421 and recognizes Representative Israel to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members. Last session, Chair Capriglione had a bill called House Bill 8. And in that bill, we dealt with things like data security, how to take care of our data. State agencies are taking care of a lot of our sensitive data. So it was an omnibus security bill. One of the aspects of that bill was to require the Secretary of State to work with our county elections administrators on elections and vote data security in particular. House Bill 8 will implement several recommendations that came from a study that we required from the Office of the Secretary of State to conduct regarding cyber attacks on our elections infrastructure. House Bill 1421 creates a new section in the Election Code on elections cybersecurity to better prepare and defend our state against cyber attacks. 1421 requires the Office of the Secretary of State and counties to undergo annual cyber hygiene trainings to report cybersecurity breaches at any level of government to legislative committee members with oversight of elections and implement other measures that strengthen our elections infrastructure. We have some experts here today, especially looking forward to hearing from them and as well as from the Secretary of State's office, who has done a lot of work during the interim and will be reporting on that today. So I can take any questions now or later, and I do reserve the right to close.
Representative Middleton, do you have a question?
Thank you, Representative. I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the cyber attacks that you're referring to, would those come primarily through the internet?
Yes.
Yeah, internet.
The point being that we, the state of Texas, are a huge repository of sensitive information. Every single agency, including our county partners and the Secretary of State. So this is, we've had a lot of hearings, a lot of discussion as a body about how we take care of that data. And House Bill 8 last session was a desire to kick it up a notch and do some more thorough assistance to the counties. And so you'll be hearing about what's been happening in the interim and how we can be more thorough utilizing some language from this bill.
Thank you. So internet is one of the main issues here that you're trying to cover in this bill. And so you believe that the internet could compromise our election integrity and security in our state?
I think every state agency is under threat of attack. They've testified to that. So we'll be talking today about how we're doing a really good job to protect against it.
Thank you.
Any other questions, members? Okay, the chair calls Alan Vera.
Good morning again, Alan Vera, Chairman, Harris County Republican Party Ballot Security Committee, testifying in opposition to HB 1421. We're concerned that this bill creates the appearance that Texas is taking concrete steps to address the vulnerability of our electronically stored election information. In fact, this bill calls for more training that's already available from multiple sources today. Voters deserve to be confident that Texas is taking concrete steps to protect the integrity of that data with real accountability and remedial action. We'd prefer a bill that funds a more aggressive approach to our cybersecurity across all of our election records. We'd prefer the funding of a program which, one, authorizes attempts to penetrate the SOS and county registrar databases, noting and recording specific weaknesses and vulnerabilities, and two, requires specific corrections to those vulnerabilities discovered. Rather than simply provide for more training, this approach would identify specific issues to be addressed to create accountability for implementing needed improvements. Less than 1 hour south of here is Lackland Air Force Base. In the far back of the base, behind the razor wire, are multiple squadrons of USAF Cyber Warfare Wing. The mission for some is offensive, to penetrate and attack the data systems of our enemies. Others have a defensive mission, to protect our systems. Embedded in all those squadrons in leadership positions are civilian contractors with years of experience in both offensive and defensive activity. It's puzzling to us that Texas is not tapping into the knowledge available locally to craft a more robust program that could actually and measurably improve the security of our electronic election data. We're sure, as Ms. Israel said, that the threat is real. We would hope this committee would take the lead in funding an interim study to develop a program that goes beyond mere training to more proactive and measurable improvement of the security of our election data. Sorry about the rant. Thanks for listening.
Members, any questions of Mr. Vera? Representative Kane?
Mr. Vera, could you maybe explain to us a few ways that we could secure these issues? I mean, if we're opposing this, what's a way to solve it?
An example would be the Secretary of State to certify certain vendors who are experts in cybersecurity, both offense and defense, and certify them for the state of Texas, and then allow the individual counties, okay, the counties have to opt in over a certain year period. These vendors would be authorized to try to penetrate the electronic data of county and SOS authorities. They would discover vulnerabilities and report them back to the SOS. Then the SOS would give direction, hopefully with good authority, to the counties to make those fixes. So it's a roving program of penetration and correction, constantly revolving unannounced.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions of the witness? Here.
Swanson.
Representative Swanson?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Is there another bill that's been proposed that does do the things you want, or are you hoping for an amendment to this bill or some other bill?
We haven't seen it. I mean, I testified last session that we believe, our Ballot Security Committee believes, that it's time to stop dancing around the issue and get to the heart of what the real people do, the experts. They actually try to crack into the data, find the weaknesses, and fix it. So, no, I'm not aware of any other bill right now that's taken that approach.
Any other questions, members? Thank you for your testimony. The chair calls Keith Ingram.
Keith Ingram here from the Elections Division at the Secretary of State's office, here on HB 1421 as a resource.
Representative. Chair recognizes Representative Swanson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Are things like what Mr. Vera mentioned already being done, or is there a real need for this? Can you just address whether we need to be more aggressive in actually checking and having people try to hack our systems?
Absolutely. The federal government gave out $380 million to the states last year, and Texas got $23 million of that. And we are using that money to improve election security in Texas. We are using that money at the state level to harden our voter registration database and encrypt the data, and two-factor authentication being implemented, and all of those sort of things. But in addition, we are using the bulk of the money to do exactly what Mr. Vera was saying. We've got a managed security service agreement with the Department of Information Resources, and we have hired them to go inspect every single county in Texas. Now, the counties obviously have to volunteer. So far, we've got about 90 counties who have asked for the contract to be inspected, and we've got about, how many have returned it? About 30 have returned it. We've got 5 that have been completed. We've got, I think, 6 that are in progress. So that work is actually happening right now. We would like very much to have all 254 counties participate, and we just sent out a reminder last week about the availability of this service and how comprehensive a security check it is, and how it is in those counties' interest to get this check done while it's being paid for by the federal government.
Representative Kane, did you have a question?
Yes. So you had mentioned the voter registration, how y'all are trying to resolve some problems. Are there currently some security issues?
No, sir, but we always want to be proactive with regard to security. We never want to rest on our laurels. So using this money from the federal government, we have used about $2 million of it on our statewide voter registration database. In our HB8 report, we noted that the biggest weakness for our voter registration database is the county users, and so we're trying to use the election assessment tool as a way to shore up our county users. But we also made recommendations that are implemented, that would be implemented in HB 1421, for us to be able to require the counties to do cyber hygiene training before they can log on to Team. Right now, we've made the training available to the counties. We've got over 2,200 users of the system, and we've had about 150 users take the training. If this bill were to pass, then we would be able to require every user to take the training. So this is, we believe, would implement our HB8 recommendations in that regard. The other thing is that we don't know what viruses or keyloggers or whatever are on the county users system, and so we need to be able to control the endpoints, either by making the counties use a thin client like a Chromebook or something to access our system that we would have the ability to keep patched and all of that, or to use virtual desktops. And this bill also would allow us to do that, provided the funds were available. I don't know why I can't speak today.
Yeah. Well, so it sounds like the problem is the decentralization of our systems. Is that really the issue?
It is very much the case that a system is only as strong as its weakest link. And when we had two voter registration databases that were accessed by nefarious people in 2016, one of those used compromised county login credentials in Arizona.
Thank you.
Representative Ferrer.
Yeah, I have a question for you. Have you received any responses of not wanting to participate in the survey?
We have. There has been a variety of reasons expressed by the counties for not wanting to participate. Part of it is that they're concerned about what might be found and then not having the resources to remediate it. And we have money left over. We have another 13 or 14 million that we can use for remediation to assist the counties with that if something expensive is found. We just don't know what that second half of the program looks like until we get more of these assessments done. So we don't really know if 13 or 14 million is half of the cost or almost all of it, or we just don't know yet. So we're trying to save that money back to help the counties. The other thing they're concerned about is some counties feel like they're too small to worry about. That we've got one employee in our elections department, that all the election equipment is locked in the warehouse. There's not anything to worry about here. And so what we're trying to help the counties understand is that from the smallest county, Loving County, all the way to Harris County, you have potential vulnerabilities that we can help you identify and fix. And so we want to make sure that message gets out there to the county judges and commissioner courts.
Sure. And is that list of counties who have denied or didn't want to participate available to us?
Sure.
Okay. Please, if you could share it with us. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Representative Swanson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I just want to clarify. You're saying that counties are not using the training that's currently available to them at no cost, correct?
That's right.
And they are not using this testing system that would actually come in and look for weaknesses in their system, and that also would be no cost to them?
That's right.
And that you do have money available if weaknesses are found and they need to remediate.
That's right.
So,
and we've told the counties the only way to get remediation money is to do the assessment. That's the path forward for more money.
Okay, and a follow-up question is, if a local county's system were hacked by nefarious people, would they be able to get into more than just that county's voter registration file? Would they be able to connect up to the state